Hello everyone, this is Dr. Abirami, your Physiology faculty. I welcome you all to the discussion of NEET Grand Test for Physiology Questions discussion. First of all, how was the paper? It was an easy to moderate type of paper, all one-liners, not much difficult type of questions. If you have understood the basics in physiology, definitely it was an easy paper. Let's move on to the discussion of first question. The protein present in brown adipose tissue. The answer to this question is thermogenin. What is this brown adipose tissue? Brown fat. It is a special type of fat present in infants and it has a high rate of metabolism. And that is why it can produce plenty of heat. It is a mechanism of heat production in babies. Let's quickly learn about this protein thermogenin. Thermogenin is also known as uncoupling protein 1 or UCP1. It is a mitochondrial carrier protein found in brown adipose tissue. It is used to generate heat by non-shivering thermogenesis and makes a quantitatively important contribution to countering heat loss in babies, which would otherwise occur due to their high surface area volume ratio. So babies have a high surface area volume ratio. So they have a plenty of heat loss. To balance for this, they have to produce a lot of heat. Who will produce this heat? Brown adipose tissue, because it has a high rate of metabolism. And which is that protein present in brown adipose tissue? Thermogenin. So the answer to this question is protein present in brown adipose tissue. Option A, thermogenin. Moving on to question number 2. Function of brown fat. Yes, another question on the same concept of brown fat. Thermogenesis is the answer. Quickly, let's learn about thermogenesis and we'll come back to this question. First of all, what is thermogenesis? The mechanism of heat production inside the body. This is called thermogenesis. Body temperature normally 37 degrees Celsius. When this falls to 36 degrees C, then you have to produce heat. Body temperature is falling. To balance for this, you should produce heat. This we call it as non-shivering thermogenesis. Non-shivering thermogenesis. What is non-shivering thermogenesis? Without shivering itself, we can produce heat. How is it possible? In adults, the mechanisms of non-shivering thermogenesis, sympathetics. Because the sympathetic hormones, epinephrines and norepinephrines, they can produce heat. The other mechanism by thyroid hormones, because thyroid hormones have a high BMR. The basal metabolic rate is more, so they can also produce heat. The other mechanism by eating, just by eating. When you eat, for digestive processes, all metabolisms are happening and metabolism in turn produces heat. That is why when you are in a cold room or if it is raining outside, you feel like having a hot vada or bhaji because your body is asking you to eat. When you eat, metabolisms are increasing and therefore you can produce heat. This is the mechanism of non-shivering thermogenesis in adults. What about infants? The mechanism of non-shivering thermogenesis in infants is by brown fat, because brown fat has a high rate of metabolism. So this can also produce heat. When there is a further fall in body temperature to 35.5 degrees C, now body produces shivering thermogenesis. You shiver and you produce heat. This is called shivering thermogenesis. Who's responsible for this shivering? Posterior hypothalamus. We have discussed this in hypothalamus, the nucleus of hypothalamus. We saw posterior hypothalamus produces shivering. And that is how shivering thermogenesis. When you shiver, muscles are contracting. When muscles are contracting, plenty of heat is produced. And this we call it as shivering thermogenesis. Going back to the question, the function of brown fat is thermogenesis. To be very specific, non-shivering thermogenesis in infants is by brown fat. Let's move on to the next question. Hardy-Weinberg law is used to predict inheritance of which of the following? The answer to this question is option B, autosomal recessive. Let's quickly learn about this. The Hardy-Weinberg law is used in population genetic studies. It was discovered by English mathematician Hardy and German physician Wilhelm Weinberg. The Hardy-Weinberg law makes it possible to determine the frequency of different genotypes in a diploid chromosomal complement. That is, where there are two separate copies of a certain gene. So this is mainly used to determine the frequency of different genotype in a diploid chromosomal complement. In clinical genetics, how is it useful? It is mainly used for determining the frequency of heterozygosity in autosomal recessive heritable disorders when only the disease frequency is known. So mainly it is used for determining the frequency of heterozygosity in the case of autosomal recessive heritable disorders. So the answer to this question is autosomal recessive. This is a very rare type of question. Over to question number 4. Blood flow changes are least during exercise in. When you exercise, sympathetic activity increases and sympathetic causes vasoconstriction. When there is vasoconstriction, blood flow decreases to different parts of the body, and that can happen to your brain also. But the brain cannot withstand loss of blood supply, not more than 4 to 5 minutes. Even for 4 to 5 minutes, if there is loss of blood supply to the brain, it can even cause permanent brain damage. And that is why during exercise, blood flow changes can happen in any other part of the body, but least changes are seen in the brain because brain cannot withstand loss of blood supply. So the answer to this question is blood flow changes are least during exercise in the brain. Option A, brain. Over to question number 5. The main fuel used by the brain during starvation is. The answer to the question is option D, ketone body. Let's quickly learn about this. The formation of ketone bodies is a vital evolutionary mechanism aimed at providing an alternative fuel source for the brain besides glucose, thereby sparing amino acids and enhancing survival during the prolonged fasting state. So what is starvation? When you don't eat for a long time, that is called starvation. So if there is prolonged fasting state, starvation, you have to take care of the fuel. You also have to take care of your survival. You need amino acids to enhance the survival. And that is why there is ketone bodies which are used as the main fuel source for the brain during starvation. And this has also been confirmed by investigations. The preferential use of ketone bodies by the brain during fasting has been further quantified and visualized with positron emission tomography scan. So this has also confirmed the finding that ketone bodies are the main fuel to the brain during the part of starvation. Over to question number 6. Neutrophils increase in number after exercise due to. See what happens to neutrophils during exercise. So when you do exercise, there is possibility of epithelial damage. And because of this epithelial damage, there is release of chemotactic cytokines. When there is chemotactic cytokines, what are these chemotactic cytokines? Chemicals which are released. And these chemotactic cytokines, they cause chemotaxis. Chemotaxis means attraction of these neutrophils to the site of injury. So during exercise, there is tissue injury, and this tissue injury causes epithelial damage, and this epithelial damage causes release of chemotactic cytokines. Chemicals are released, and these chemicals can cause chemotaxis, neutrophil chemotaxis. And this neutrophil helps to remove the necrotic tissue by phagocytosis. What is phagocytosis? Cell eating. So this causes neutrophils to do phagocytosis. And one other possibility is that the neutrophils which are doing phagocytosis, they can release reactive oxygen species, and this reactive oxygen species can cause secondary injury. So there is possibility of secondary injury also. So this question, neutrophils increase in number after exercise due to epithelial destruction, because after exercise the epithelial damage releases chemotactic cytokines which causes chemotaxis, and neutrophils are attracted to the site of tissue injury. They cause phagocytosis, and also keep in mind neutrophils itself can again cause a secondary injury. That is also possible. So the answer to this question is epithelial destruction. Neutrophils increase in number after exercise due to epithelial destruction. Over to question number 7. Secretory phase of endometrium is due to which hormone? Only if you have a good knowledge of menstrual cycle and oogenesis, you can answer this question. So quickly let's learn oogenesis and menstrual cycle, and we'll come back to this question. Oogenesis. What is oogenesis? Primordial follicles begin to form at 15 weeks of gestation itself. So in a baby, when the baby is inside the mother itself, at 15th week of gestation itself, primordial follicles are formed. At 28 weeks of gestation, meiosis 1 begins. Meiosis 1 has started, but it will be arrested in prophase 1. It stops there itself in prophase 1. And the girl baby is born now. At the birth of a girl baby, there are around 4 lakh primordial follicles in the ovary. Ovary contains around 4 lakh primordial follicles. After puberty, the girl baby attains puberty now. What happens after puberty? Every month, one primordial follicle is selected. From this 4 lakh primordial follicle, every month, only one primordial follicle is selected and is converted into Graafian follicle. The Graafian follicle contains the primary oocyte inside. So what is menstrual cycle in females? So it's a 28-day cycle where the first 14 days, one primordial follicle is selected and it is converted into Graafian follicle. That is what is happening in the first 14 days. That's why we call the first 14 days as a follicular phase, because primordial follicle is converted into Graafian follicle. And on the 14th day, there is ovulation. What is ovulation? The release of the secondary oocyte is called ovulation. Graafian follicles contains the primary oocyte, but just before ovulation, this primary oocyte completes meiosis 1. When did this meiosis 1 start? It started around 28 weeks of gestation. Even before birth of the baby, meiosis 1 had started. But this is completing only just before ovulation in the menstrual cycle. So on completing meiosis 1, it is converted into secondary oocyte and a first polar body. What is the fate of this secondary oocyte? This is released during ovulation. If there is a sperm waiting there, it combines with the sperm to complete fertilization. On fertilization, it completes meiosis 2. So meiosis 1 is completed just before ovulation and meiosis 2 is completed on fertilization. And on completing meiosis 2, it forms a fertilized ovum and a second polar body. This is the process of oogenesis. What is menstrual cycle here? Every month during the menstrual cycle, first 14 days, how one primordial follicle is selected and converted into the Graafian follicle. So let's see that. So every month, one primordial follicle is selected, converted into Graafian follicle. So in this process, during the first 14 days, which hormone do you think will increase? There is formation of Graafian follicle. So follicle stimulating hormone increases. And what is this phase called as? Follicular phase. Because Graafian follicle is forming, it is called follicular phase. So during the first 14 days, the initial 14 days of the menstrual cycle, there is formation of Graafian follicle. That is why we call it as a follicular phase, and the hormone responsible for this is follicular stimulating hormone. This Graafian follicle ruptures. That is called ovulation on 14th day. Just before ovulation, there is LH surge. What is LH surge? It is a positive feedback mechanism where LH increases and LH increases estrogen. Estrogen increases LH. This is a positive feedback cycle which keeps on happening. That is called LH surge. So just before ovulation, the hormonal changes, increase in luteinizing hormone and increase in estrogen levels. Now what is the fate of this Graafian follicle? The next 14 days, the last 14 days of the menstrual cycle, This Graafian follicle is converted into corpus luteum, and the corpus luteum begins to produce progesterone. That is why this phase is called luteal phase. Because corpus luteum is formed, it is called luteal phase of menstrual cycle. The hormone responsible for this, progesterone. What is the fate of this corpus luteum? If fertilization happens, it forms corpus luteum of pregnancy, and this will take care of producing the placental hormones. If no fertilization has happened, it forms corpus luteum menstrualis, and this again forms corpus albicans, which is washed away in the next menstrual bleeding cycle. So this is the changes that happens during menstrual cycle. Now let's correlate this with this diagram. So in this diagram you can see 1 to 28 days cycle. The first 5 days bleeding happens, the bleeding phase, and after the 5th day till the 14th day, the endometrium has to recover from the bleeding changes. During the bleeding phase, the endometrium shedding has happened. So it has to recover from that. So it has to proliferate. That is why in the uterus it is called as the proliferative phase. So from 6th day to 14th day it is called proliferative phase. What do you call this in the ovary? In the ovary, primordial follicle is converted to Graafian follicle. So it becomes follicular phase. So in the uterus it is called proliferative phase because endometrium is proliferating. In the ovary it is called follicular phase because Graafian follicle is being formed. These are the changes that take place during the first 14 days. And how do you correlate with the hormonal changes? During the first 14 days, FSH level increases. Yes, Graafian follicle is formed. So follicle stimulating hormone increases. And this is 14th day ovulation. Just before ovulation, LH level increases and estrogen increases. This is the 14th day. So that is LH surge. Just before ovulation, you have LH surge. And after ovulation, the last 14 days, what are the changes? In the corpus luteum, in the ovary, corpus luteum is formed. That's why it is called luteal phase. So in ovary, it is luteal phase. In the endometrium, secretions begin to form. That's why it is called secretory phase. So in the uterus, it is secretory phase. In your ovary, it is luteal phase. And the hormone change that happens, corpus luteum begins to produce progesterone. So in the hormonal cycle, progesterone levels are increasing. Going back to this question, secretory phase of endometrium is due to which of the following? Progesterone. So quickly, let me tell you all the changes together. So first to 14th day and then 14 to 28 days. On the 14th day, there is ovulation. So during the first 14 days, in the ovary, what is the change that happens? Graafian follicle is formed. So it is the follicular phase. The last 14 days, corpus luteum is formed. So it is the luteal phase. What is the change that happens in the uterus? The first 5 days is bleeding, endometrium shedding. 6th to 14th day, it is recovering, it is proliferating. So in the uterus, it is called proliferative phase. And later on, the endometrium begins to produce secretions. So it is called secretory phase. What about the hormonal changes? First 14 days, there is increase in FSH levels. Just before ovulation, increase in LH and estrogen. After the 14th day, there is increase in progesterone. So this is the summary of menstrual cycle. So going back to the question, secretory phase of endometrium is due to which of the following? Option B, progesterone. So that was a short discussion of NEET Grand Test 4 Physiology questions. And always remember, don't settle for less when you have more. Thank you so much for watching this session. Thank you.